The Hartman Case, a dive into the dark mind of Dr. Death. Chapter 1. The Doctor Who Became Death. In the sterile corridors of hospitals across the American Midwest during the 1980s, a figure moved with the confidence and authority that comes with years of medical training and the trust of countless patients. Dr. Michael Swango appeared to be everything society expects from a physician: intelligent, dedicated, and committed to the Hippocratic Oath's fundamental principle of do no harm. However, beneath this carefully constructed facade lurked one of the most prolific serial killers in American medical history. Born Michael Joseph Swango on October 21, 1954, in Tacoma, Washington, he would grow up to embody the darkest perversion of the healing profession. His story is not just one of individual evil, but a chilling examination of how institutional failures, professional arrogance, and systemic negligence can enable a predator to operate with impunity for decades. The nickname Dr. Death would follow Swango throughout his murderous career, but it was another moniker that revealed the depth of his psychological disturbance. Colleagues and investigators would later discover that Swango had referred to himself as Hartman in personal writings, a name that seemed to reflect his view of himself as someone who seduced victims into trusting him before delivering death. What made Swango particularly terrifying was not just the number of his victims, estimated to be between 35 and 60 people, but the methodical, almost scientific approach he took to murder. He used his medical knowledge to select poisons and methods that would be difficult to detect, often mimicking natural causes of death or complications from existing medical conditions. The hospitals where Swango worked became hunting grounds, where he could select victims with impunity. Patients who should have been recovering under his care instead found themselves at the mercy of a man who derived sexual and psychological satisfaction from watching them die. The very institution designed to preserve life became an instrument of death in his hands. His crimes spanned multiple states and even crossed international borders, as Swango's medical credentials allowed him to find work wherever he went. Each new position provided fresh opportunities to kill, and each suspicious death was often attributed to natural causes or medical complications rather than murder. The investigation that would eventually bring Swango to justice revealed a pattern of death and suffering that had been overlooked or ignored by medical institutions, more concerned with protecting their reputations than protecting their patients. The case would expose fundamental flaws in the medical licensing system and the way hospitals conducted background checks on their staff. Chapter 2. The Making of a Monster. Michael Swango's transformation from a promising young man into a serial killer began long before he ever set foot in a medical school or hospital. His childhood in Quincy, Illinois, was marked by the kind of psychological trauma and dysfunction that criminologists now recognize as potential precursors to violent behavior, though at the time the warning signs were either missed or ignored. His father, Virgil Swango, was a career military officer whose rigid discipline and emotional distance created an atmosphere of fear and control in the household. The elder Swango's authoritarian parenting style, combined with his frequent absences due to military deployments, left young Michael craving both approval and control, psychological needs that would later manifest in deadly ways. The family's frequent relocations due to military assignments prevented Michael from forming stable relationships or developing normal social connections. This constant upheaval contributed to his sense of isolation and difference from his peers, feelings that he would later channel into a grandiose sense of superiority and entitlement. Early signs of Michael's disturbed psychology emerged during his teenage years, though they were often dismissed as typical adolescent rebellion or academic stress. He showed an unusual fascination with death and violence, collecting newspaper clippings about accidents and murders with an intensity that concerned some who knew him. His academic performance was exceptional, particularly in science and mathematics, which earned him praise from teachers and parents who saw his intellectual gifts as evidence of future success. However, this academic achievement also fed his developing narcissism and belief that he was superior to those around him. During his time at Quincy Notre Dame High School, Michael began exhibiting the manipulative behaviors that would later serve him so well as a serial killer. He learned to present different faces to different people, appearing as the perfect student to teachers, while engaging in increasingly disturbing behavior when he thought no one was watching. The decision to pursue medicine was driven not by a genuine desire to heal, but by Michael's recognition that the medical profession would provide him with the perfect cover for his developing homicidal fantasies. The respect and trust automatically accorded to physicians would give him access to vulnerable victims and the knowledge to kill them without detection. His acceptance to Southern Illinois University School of Medicine in 1979 marked the beginning of his transformation from a disturbed young man into a predator with the skills and opportunity to kill. Medical school provided him not only with the technical knowledge he would need to commit murder, but also with the professional credentials that would allow him to move freely through the healthcare system. If you're following this disturbing psychological analysis, make sure to subscribe. Understanding how killers develop their methods helps us recognize warning signs and protect potential victims. The medical school environment, with its emphasis on life and death decisions and its culture of professional superiority, provided the perfect incubator for Michael's developing God complex and his belief that he had the right to decide who lived and who died. Chapter 3. Medical School and Early Warning Signs. Michael Swango's years at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine from 1979 to 1983 should have been a time of learning the sacred art of healing, but instead became a period where he refined his skills as a predator and began his career as a killer. The medical school environment, with its emphasis on academic excellence and professional development, provided the perfect cover for someone learning to use medical knowledge for murder rather than healing. From the beginning, Swango's behavior at medical school was marked by disturbing patterns that should have raised red flags among faculty and administrators. He showed an unusual interest in pathology and forensic medicine, spending hours studying the effects of various poisons and toxins on the human body. While such interests might be normal for a medical student, Swango's fascination went beyond academic curiosity to something more sinister. His classmates began to notice his strange behavior during clinical rotations, particularly his apparent excitement when patients took a turn for the worse or died unexpectedly. While other students showed appropriate concern and sadness when patients suffered complications, Swango seemed energized by these events, often volunteering to assist with post-mortem procedures or asking detailed questions about the cause of death. The first documented suspicious deaths associated with Swango occurred during his clinical rotations, though they wouldn't be recognized as murders until years later. Patients under his care experienced unexpected complications, sudden deteriorations in their conditions, or mysterious symptoms that didn't match their diagnoses. These incidents were typically attributed to the natural progression of illness or unfortunate medical complications. Swango's academic performance remained strong throughout medical school, which helped deflect attention from his behavioral abnormalities. Professors and supervisors were often willing to overlook concerning behavior from high-achieving students, assuming that academic excellence indicated overall competence and character. His personal writings from this period, discovered much later by investigators, revealed the depth of his psychological disturbance and his growing confidence in his ability to kill without detection. He wrote detailed descriptions of his fantasies about poisoning people and expressed sexual excitement about watching victims die. The medical school's failure to properly investigate the suspicious deaths that occurred during Swango's rotations represented the first in a long series of institutional failures that would enable his killing spree to continue for decades. The culture of professional courtesy and reluctance to question the actions of colleagues created an environment where even obvious warning signs were ignored. Despite the growing number of suspicious incidents, Swango graduated from medical school in 1983 and was accepted into an internship program at Ohio State University Medical Center. The lack of communication between institutions meant that his new employers had no knowledge of the concerning patterns that had emerged during his medical school years. The transition from medical school to internship marked a significant escalation in Swango's criminal activities as he gained greater autonomy and responsibility for patient care. The increased access to patients and medications provided him with more opportunities to kill, while his growing medical expertise made his murders more sophisticated and harder to detect. Share this investigation with others who need to understand how institutional failures can enable predators. Awareness of these systemic problems is crucial for preventing future tragedies. Chapter 4. The Internship of Death. Michael Swango's internship at Ohio State University Medical Center from 1983 to 1984 marked a dramatic escalation in his killing spree as he gained unprecedented access to vulnerable patients and powerful medications. The hospital environment provided him with the perfect hunting ground, where his victims were already sick and where unexpected deaths could easily be attributed to natural causes or medical complications. The suspicious deaths began almost immediately after Swango started his internship. Patients who had been stable or improving suddenly took dramatic turns for the worse, often developing mysterious symptoms that didn't match their original diagnoses. The pattern was subtle at first, but became more pronounced as Swango grew bolder and more confident in his ability to kill without detection. His preferred method was poisoning, using medications and chemicals readily available in the hospital setting. Swango would inject patients with lethal doses of insulin, potassium chloride, or other substances that could cause cardiac arrest or respiratory failure. His medical training allowed him to select poisons that would be difficult to detect in routine post-mortem examinations. The victims were chosen based on their vulnerability and the likelihood that their deaths would not be thoroughly investigated. Elderly patients, those with terminal illnesses, and individuals without strong family support were preferred targets because their deaths were less likely to raise suspicions or prompt detailed inquiries. Swango's behavior during these incidents was particularly disturbing to those who witnessed it. While other medical staff showed appropriate concern and worked frantically to save patients who were crashing, Swango often appeared calm or even excited. Some colleagues noted that he seemed to volunteer for codes and emergency situations with unusual enthusiasm. The nursing staff began to notice patterns in the deaths and complications that occurred when Swango was on duty. Several nurses reported their concerns to supervisors, noting that patients seemed to deteriorate more frequently during Swango's shifts. However, these reports were often dismissed as coincidence or the result of statistical variation. The hospital's response to these concerns was inadequate and reflected the institutional arrogance and professional courtesy that would enable Swango's crimes to continue. Rather than conducting a thorough investigation, administrators chose to quietly encourage Swango to seek employment elsewhere, effectively passing the problem to another institution. The failure to properly investigate the suspicious deaths at Ohio State represented a critical missed opportunity to stop Swango's killing spree before it could continue. The hospital's decision to provide neutral or even positive references for Swango when he applied for other positions demonstrated a callous disregard for patient safety and public welfare. By the end of his internship, Swango had likely killed dozens of patients, though the exact number would never be known due to the hospital's failure to conduct proper investigations or maintain adequate records. The deaths were scattered across different units and shifts, making it difficult to establish clear patterns without systematic analysis. Like and subscribe if you want to follow more investigations that reveal how institutional negligence can enable serial killers to operate in healthcare settings. Understanding these failures is crucial for protecting patients. Share this investigation with others who need to understand how institutional failures can enable predators. Awareness of these systemic problems is crucial for preventing future tragedies. Chapter 4. The Internship of Death. Michael Swango's internship at Ohio State University Medical Center from 1983 to 1984 marked a dramatic escalation in his killing spree, as he gained unprecedented access to vulnerable patients and powerful medications. The hospital environment provided him with the perfect hunting ground, where his victims were already sick and where unexpected deaths could easily be attributed to natural causes or medical complications. The suspicious deaths began almost immediately after Swango started his internship. Patients who had been stable or improving suddenly took dramatic turns for the worse, often developing mysterious symptoms that didn't match their original diagnoses. The pattern was subtle at first, but became more pronounced as Swango grew bolder and more confident in his ability to kill without detection. His preferred method was poisoning, using medications and chemicals readily available in the hospital setting. Swango would inject patients with lethal doses of insulin, potassium chloride, or other substances that could cause cardiac arrest or respiratory failure. His medical training allowed him to select poisons that would be difficult to detect in routine post-mortem examinations. The victims were chosen based on their vulnerability and the likelihood that their deaths would not be thoroughly investigated. Elderly patients, those with terminal illnesses, and individuals without strong family support were preferred targets because their deaths were less likely to raise suspicions or prompt detailed inquiries. Swango's behavior during these incidents was particularly disturbing to those who witnessed it. While other medical staff showed appropriate concern and worked frantically to save patients who were crashing, Swango often appeared calm or even excited. Some colleagues noted that he seemed to volunteer for codes and emergency situations with unusual enthusiasm. The nursing staff began to notice patterns in the deaths and complications that occurred when Swango was on duty. Several nurses reported their concerns to supervisors, noting that patients seemed to deteriorate more frequently during Swango's shifts. However, these reports were often dismissed as coincidence or the result of statistical variation. The hospital's response to these concerns was inadequate and reflected the institutional arrogance and professional courtesy that would enable Swango's crimes to continue. Rather than conducting a thorough investigation, administrators chose to quietly encourage Swango to seek employment elsewhere, effectively passing the problem to another institution. The failure to properly investigate the suspicious deaths at Ohio State represented a critical missed opportunity to stop Swango's killing spree before it could continue. The hospital's decision to provide neutral or even positive references for Swango when he applied for other positions demonstrated a callous disregard for patient safety and public welfare. By the end of his internship, Swango had likely killed dozens of patients, though the exact number would never be known due to the hospital's failure to conduct proper investigations or maintain adequate records. The deaths were scattered across different units and shifts, making it difficult to establish clear patterns without systematic analysis. Like and subscribe if you want to follow more investigations that reveal how institutional negligence can enable serial killers to operate in healthcare settings. Understanding these failures is crucial for protecting patients. Chapter 5. The Paramedic, Years and Escalation. After being quietly pushed out of his medical internship, Michael Swango found himself unable to secure another hospital position, largely due to whispered concerns about his performance and the suspicious deaths that had occurred during his tenure. However, rather than abandon his access to victims, he adapted by taking a position as a paramedic with the Adams County Ambulance Corps in Quincy, Illinois, in 1985. The paramedic position provided Swango with a different but equally dangerous platform for his murderous activities. As an emergency medical technician, he had access to powerful medications and was often alone with patients during transport, creating perfect opportunities for murder without witnesses. The high-stress, life-and-death nature of emergency medicine also provided cover for suspicious deaths. His colleagues in the ambulance service quickly noticed disturbing patterns in Swango's behavior and the outcomes of calls he handled. Patients who had been stable during initial assessment would suddenly deteriorate during transport, often dying before reaching the hospital. The frequency of these incidents was statistically improbable and raised concerns among experienced paramedics. Swango's fascination with death became more apparent during this period, as he had less need to maintain the professional facade required in hospital settings. Colleagues reported that he seemed excited by traumatic calls and would often volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. His apparent enjoyment of human suffering became increasingly difficult to hide. The investigation that would eventually expose some of Swango's crimes began during this period, when his co-workers became suspicious enough to report their concerns to law enforcement. The Adams County Sheriff's Department began looking into the unusual number of deaths associated with Swango's ambulance runs, though the investigation would take years to produce results. During this time, Swango also began experimenting with poisoning people outside of his professional duties. He brought arsenic-laced donuts to work, causing several of his colleagues to become violently ill. This incident marked a significant escalation in his criminal behavior, as he was now targeting people who were not patients and who had no reason to expect that they might be poisoned. The poisoning of his co-workers demonstrated Swango's growing confidence and his belief that he was too intelligent to be caught. He seemed to view the incident as a kind of experiment, observing the effects of the poison on his victims with scientific detachment while maintaining his innocent facade. The investigation into the donut poisoning incident led to Swango's first criminal conviction in 1985, when he was charged with aggravated battery for poisoning his co-workers. However, the charges were relatively minor compared to the scope of his actual crimes, and he served only 2 years in prison before being released. His conviction and imprisonment should have ended his access to potential victims and his ability to work in healthcare, but the inadequate background check systems and poor communication between institutions would allow him to resume his killing spree after his release. The criminal justice system's failure to recognize the true scope of his crimes meant that he was treated as a minor offender rather than the serial killer he actually was. The paramedic years represented a crucial period in Swango's criminal development, as he refined his methods and grew more confident in his ability to kill without detection. The experience also taught him valuable lessons about avoiding suspicion and manipulating institutional systems that he would use throughout the rest of his criminal career. Chapter 6. Return to Medicine and International Crimes. Upon his release from prison in 1987, Michael Swango faced the challenge of returning to medical practice despite his criminal conviction and the growing suspicions about his involvement in patient deaths. However, his intelligence and manipulative abilities, combined with systemic failures in medical licensing and background checks, allowed him to not only resume his medical career, but to expand his killing spree internationally. Swango's first step was to complete his medical residency, which he had been unable to finish due to his imprisonment. Through a combination of falsified documents, omitted information, and the failure of institutions to conduct thorough background checks, he was accepted into a psychiatry residency program at the University of South Dakota School of Medicine. The choice of psychiatry was particularly chilling, given Swango's psychological profile and his history of manipulating and harming vulnerable people. The field gave him access to patients who were often isolated, stigmatized, and whose complaints about mistreatment might be dismissed as symptoms of their mental illness. During his residency, the pattern of suspicious deaths resumed, though Swango had learned to be more careful about avoiding detection. He spaced out his killings more carefully, varied his methods, and chose victims whose deaths were less likely to be investigated thoroughly. His growing medical expertise made his murders more sophisticated and harder to trace. The completion of his residency in 1991 opened new opportunities for Swango to practice medicine and kill patients. He obtained positions at various hospitals across the United States, each time using falsified credentials and references to hide his criminal past and the suspicious deaths that had followed him throughout his career. In 1993, Swango made the decision to take his killing spree international, accepting a position with a medical aid organization in Zimbabwe. The move to Africa provided him with access to a new population of vulnerable victims and a healthcare system with even fewer safeguards and oversight mechanisms than those in the United States. The conditions in Zimbabwe's healthcare system were ideal for a serial killer like Swango. Hospitals were understaffed and under-resourced. Death rates were already high due to poverty and disease, and there was little infrastructure for investigating suspicious deaths. Swango could kill with virtual impunity while maintaining his facade as a humanitarian doctor helping the poor. His victims in Zimbabwe included both patients and colleagues, as Swango expanded his killing to include healthcare workers who might have become suspicious of his activities. The isolation of many medical facilities and the limited communication with the outside world made it difficult for concerns about his behavior to reach authorities who might investigate. The international nature of Swango's crimes complicated efforts to investigate and prosecute him, as law enforcement agencies in different countries had limited ability to share information and coordinate their efforts. This jurisdictional confusion allowed Swango to stay one step ahead of investigators for years. His time in Zimbabwe also demonstrated the global nature of the threat posed by medical serial killers and the need for international cooperation in preventing such crimes. The case highlighted how predators could exploit differences in healthcare systems and regulatory oversight to continue their crimes in new environments. Share this story to help raise awareness about the need for better international cooperation in preventing medical serial killers. Protecting patients requires global vigilance and communication. Chapter 7. The investigation closes in. By the mid-1990s, the web of suspicion surrounding Michael Swango had grown too large to ignore, as investigators from multiple jurisdictions began connecting the dots between his medical career and the trail of suspicious deaths that followed him wherever he went. The investigation that would finally bring him to justice represented one of the most complex and challenging cases in the history of medical serial killing. The breakthrough came when investigators realized that the suspicious deaths were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that spanned multiple states and countries. FBI agents began working with local law enforcement agencies to compile a comprehensive database of deaths associated with Swango's medical career, revealing the true scope of his crimes. The investigation was complicated by the fact that many of Swango's victims had been cremated or buried years earlier, making it impossible to conduct toxicology tests that might have revealed evidence of poisoning. Investigators had to rely on medical records, witness testimony, and circumstantial evidence to build their case. One of the key pieces of evidence came from Swango's personal writings, which investigators discovered during searches of his residences and belongings. These documents revealed his fascination with death and his sexual excitement about killing patients, providing crucial insight into his psychological motivations and methods. The international nature of Swango's crimes required unprecedented cooperation between American law enforcement agencies and their counterparts in Zimbabwe and other countries where he had worked. This collaboration was essential for gathering evidence and understanding the full extent of his criminal activities. Witnesses who had worked with Swango at various hospitals began coming forward with their suspicions and observations about his behavior. Nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers provided testimony about the unusual number of deaths that occurred during his shifts and his disturbing reactions to patient suffering. The medical records analysis revealed statistical anomalies that were impossible to explain by chance alone. The death rates in units where Swango worked were significantly higher than normal, and the types of deaths showed patterns consistent with poisoning rather than natural causes or medical complications. Forensic experts were able to analyze some tissue samples that had been preserved from Swango's victims, revealing traces of poisons and toxins that confirmed suspicions about his methods. These scientific findings provided crucial physical evidence to support the circumstantial case against him. The investigation also revealed the systemic failures that had enabled Swango's crimes to continue for so long. Hospitals had failed to conduct proper background checks. Medical licensing boards had not shared information about problematic physicians, and healthcare institutions had prioritized their reputations over patient safety. As the evidence mounted, Swango realized that his crimes were finally being exposed and that he could no longer evade justice by simply moving to a new location. His attempts to flee and hide only served to confirm investigators' suspicions about his guilt and his awareness of the crimes he had committed. Like and subscribe if you want to learn more about how complex international investigations work to catch serial killers who cross borders. Understanding these processes helps us appreciate the challenges of bringing global criminals to justice. Chapter 8. Capture and Confession. The final chapter of Michael Swango's killing spree began in 1997, when he was arrested at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport while attempting to board a flight to Saudi Arabia, where he had secured another medical position. The arrest marked the end of a decades-long career of murder and the beginning of a legal process that would finally hold him accountable for his crimes. The arrest was the result of years of painstaking investigation by federal agents who had been tracking Swango's movements and building a case against him. The timing was crucial, as investigators knew that if he reached Saudi Arabia, it might be years before they could bring him back to face justice in the United States. Initially charged with fraud related to his falsified medical credentials and applications, Swango was held while investigators continued building their murder case. The fraud charges provided a legal basis for keeping him in custody, while the more serious allegations were developed and substantiated. The interrogation process revealed the depth of Swango's psychological disturbance and his complete lack of remorse for his victims. He showed no emotion when confronted with evidence of his crimes and seemed more concerned about his legal situation than about the suffering he had caused to patients and their families. Swango's confession, when it finally came, was limited and self-serving, as he admitted to only a small fraction of the murders investigators believed he had committed. His admissions were carefully calculated to minimize his legal exposure, while providing just enough cooperation to potentially reduce his sentence. The psychological evaluation conducted during his imprisonment revealed a complex individual who combined high intelligence with complete lack of empathy for his victims. Mental health professionals diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic traits that explained his ability to kill without remorse while maintaining a facade of professional competence. The plea negotiations were complicated by the international nature of many of Swango's crimes and the difficulty of prosecuting murders that had occurred years earlier in different jurisdictions. Prosecutors had to balance the desire for justice with the practical limitations of building cases based on old evidence and scattered witnesses. In 2000, Swango pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and 1 count of assault, though investigators believed he was responsible for many more deaths. The plea agreement allowed him to avoid the death penalty in exchange for his cooperation and his agreement to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for the families of Swango's victims to confront him and express their pain and anger about his crimes. Their testimony revealed the lasting impact of his murders on the people who had loved and trusted the patients he killed. The case also prompted significant changes in medical licensing and hospital credentialing procedures, as healthcare institutions and regulatory bodies recognized the need for better background checks and information sharing to prevent similar crimes in the future. Chapter 9. The Victims and Their Stories. Behind the clinical details of Michael Swango's crimes were real people whose lives were cut short by a man they trusted to heal them. The victims of the harlotman came from all walks of life, united only by their vulnerability and their misfortune to encounter a predator disguised as a healer. Their stories serve as a reminder of the human cost of institutional failures and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Among the confirmed victims was Kristen Kinney, a 19-year-old college student who died during what should have been a routine appendectomy at Ohio State University Medical Center. Kristen was healthy, young, and had her whole life ahead of her when she entered the hospital for surgery. Instead, she became one of Swango's early victims, dying from complications that investigators later determined were caused by deliberate poisoning. Thomas Samarco was another victim whose death revealed the callous nature of Swango's crimes. The 73-year-old man was recovering well from surgery when he suddenly went into cardiac arrest during Swango's shift. His family had been told he was doing well and expected him to come home soon, making his sudden death all the more shocking and devastating. The victims in Zimbabwe included both patients and healthcare workers who had the misfortune to work alongside Swango during his time there. These individuals, many of whom were dedicating their lives to helping others in difficult circumstances, became targets of the very person who was supposed to be their colleague and ally. Each victim had family members and friends who were left to grieve their loss and struggle with questions about what had really happened to their loved ones. Many families spent years wondering if they could have done something different or if the deaths could have been prevented, carrying guilt and pain that was entirely undeserved. The investigation revealed that Swango had kept detailed records of some of his crimes, including photographs and written descriptions of his victims' suffering. These materials demonstrated the sexual and psychological gratification he derived from killing, showing that his victims were not just casualties of his crimes, but objects of his perverted fantasies. The families of victims faced additional trauma when they learned the truth about how their loved ones had died. Many had accepted explanations about medical complications or natural causes, only to discover years later that their family members had been murdered by someone they had trusted to provide care. The impact on the medical community was also significant, as healthcare workers who had worked with Swango struggled with guilt about not recognizing the signs of his crimes or not doing more to stop him. Many questioned their own judgment and their ability to trust colleagues in the future. The victims' stories also highlighted the particular vulnerability of hospital patients, who are often isolated from their support systems and dependent on medical staff for their basic needs. This vulnerability makes them ideal targets for predators, but also creates a special obligation for healthcare institutions to protect them. Memorial services and advocacy efforts in honor of Swango's victims have helped keep their memories alive while working to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Their families have become advocates for better patient safety measures and more rigorous background checks for healthcare workers. The true number of Swango's victims may never be known, as many of his crimes occurred years ago and the evidence has been lost to time. However, each confirmed victim represents a life that was valuable and meaningful, cut short by someone who had sworn to do no harm. Share this story to honor the memory of Swango's victims and to help ensure that their deaths were not in vain. Awareness and vigilance can help prevent future medical serial killers from claiming more victims. Chapter 10. Lessons Learned and Systemic Failures. The Michael Swango case exposed fundamental flaws in the healthcare system that allowed a serial killer to operate with impunity for decades, moving from institution to institution while leaving a trail of death and suffering in his wake. The systemic failures that enabled his crimes provide crucial lessons for preventing similar tragedies in the future and protecting vulnerable patients from predators who exploit the trust placed in medical professionals. One of the most significant failures was the lack of adequate background checking and information sharing between medical institutions. Hospitals routinely hired physicians without conducting thorough investigations of their past employment or checking for patterns of suspicious deaths or patient complaints. This institutional blindness allowed Swango to repeatedly start fresh at new facilities, where his criminal history was unknown. The culture of professional courtesy within the medical community also contributed to the problem, as institutions were reluctant to share negative information about former employees or to investigate suspicious patterns of patient deaths. This code of silence protected the reputation of individual doctors and hospitals at the expense of patient safety and public welfare. Medical licensing boards failed to maintain adequate oversight of physicians and did not have effective systems for tracking problematic practitioners across state lines. The fragmented nature of medical regulation in the United States made it easy for someone like Swango to obtain licenses in multiple states and continue practicing even after concerns had been raised about his competence or behavior. The case also revealed the inadequacy of hospital credentialing processes, which often relied on self-reported information from applicants rather than independent verification of their backgrounds and qualifications. This honor system approach was easily manipulated by someone willing to lie about their past or falsify documents. The international nature of Swango's crimes highlighted the need for better cooperation and information sharing between countries regarding healthcare workers who move across borders. The lack of international databases or communication systems made it possible for dangerous practitioners to simply relocate to countries with less stringent oversight. The investigation also exposed the statistical analysis tools and surveillance systems that hospitals used to monitor patient outcomes were inadequate for detecting patterns of suspicious deaths. Many institutions lacked the analytical capabilities to identify unusual mortality rates or to investigate potential causes of unexpected patient deaths. The legal system's response to medical serial killing was also found to be inadequate, with prosecutors often lacking the expertise and resources needed to build cases against healthcare workers who use their medical knowledge to commit murder. The complexity of medical evidence and the difficulty of proving intent in healthcare settings created significant challenges for law enforcement. The case led to significant reforms in medical credentialing and background checking procedures, including the creation of the National Practitioner Data Bank, which maintains records of malpractice payments, licensing actions, and other information about healthcare providers. However, many experts argue that these reforms do not go far enough to prevent future medical serial killers. Hospital accreditation standards were also strengthened to require more rigorous oversight of patient safety and mortality rates, though implementation of these standards remains inconsistent across different healthcare systems and geographic regions. The Swango case continues to be studied by law enforcement agencies, healthcare administrators, and patient safety experts as an example of how systemic failures can enable individual predators to cause massive harm. The lessons learned from this case remain relevant today as healthcare systems continue to grapple with the challenge of balancing efficiency and cost control with the need for thorough oversight and patient protection. Chapter 11. The Psychology of a Medical Serial Killer. Understanding the psychological profile of Michael Swango provides crucial insights into the mind of a medical serial killer and the factors that can transform someone trained to heal into a predator who uses medical knowledge to kill. The case offers a unique window into the psychology of healthcare-associated murder and the warning signs that might help identify potential threats in medical settings. Swango exhibited classic characteristics of psychopathy, including superficial charm, grandiose self-regard, lack of empathy, and the ability to manipulate others while maintaining a facade of normalcy. These traits served him well in medical settings where confidence and authority are often valued and where patients and colleagues are predisposed to trust healthcare providers. His narcissistic personality disorder manifested in his belief that he was superior to his colleagues and patients, and that he had the right to decide who lived and who died. This God complex is not uncommon among healthcare workers, but in Swango's case, it became the foundation for his murderous activities. The sexual component of Swango's crimes was particularly disturbing, as he derived erotic satisfaction from watching his victims suffer and die. This sexual sadism distinguished him from other types of serial killers and explained his preference for methods that allowed him to observe his victims' final moments. Swango's choice of medicine as a career was not motivated by a desire to help others, but by his recognition that the medical profession would provide him with the perfect cover for his homicidal fantasies. The respect and trust automatically accorded to physicians gave him access to vulnerable victims and the knowledge to kill them without detection. His ability to compartmentalize his criminal activities while maintaining professional relationships and even romantic partnerships demonstrated the sophisticated psychological defenses that many serial killers develop. This compartmentalization allowed him to function normally in most aspects of his life, while secretly planning and executing murders. The case also revealed the role that institutional culture can play in enabling or preventing medical serial killing. Healthcare environments that prioritize hierarchy, discourage questioning of authority, and value reputation over patient safety create conditions where predators like Swango can operate with reduced risk of detection. Swango's writings and personal materials revealed a fascination with death and violence that had been present since his youth, but had been channeled into socially acceptable forms through his medical career. His journals contain detailed descriptions of his fantasies and his actual crimes, providing unprecedented insight into the mind of a medical serial killer. The psychological evaluation conducted during his imprisonment confirmed that Swango met the criteria for multiple personality disorders and showed no capacity for genuine remorse or rehabilitation. Mental health professionals concluded that he would always pose a threat to others if given the opportunity to harm them. The case has contributed to the development of psychological profiles and risk assessment tools that can help identify potentially dangerous healthcare workers before they have the opportunity to harm patients. These tools focus on behavioral patterns, personality traits, and warning signs that might indicate a propensity for violence. Understanding the psychology of medical serial killers like Swango is crucial for developing prevention strategies and training programs that can help healthcare institutions identify and respond to potential threats. The case demonstrates that the same traits that can make someone an effective physician can also make them a dangerous predator if they lack moral constraints and empathy for others. Like and subscribe if you want to learn more about criminal psychology and how understanding the minds of killers can help us prevent future crimes. Knowledge of these patterns is essential for protecting potential victims. Chapter 12. Legacy and Ongoing Impact. More than 2 decades after Michael Swango's conviction, his case continues to influence healthcare policy, patient safety initiatives, and criminal justice approaches to medical serial killing. The legacy of the Harlotman serves as a permanent reminder of the need for vigilance in protecting vulnerable patients and the importance of systemic reforms to prevent similar tragedies. Swango remains incarcerated at the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, where he is serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. His continued imprisonment ensures that he will never again have the opportunity to harm patients, but it also serves as a symbol of the justice system's commitment to protecting society from medical predators. The case led to significant changes in medical credentialing and background checking procedures, including enhanced requirements for verifying employment history, conducting criminal background checks, and sharing information about problematic practitioners. However, many experts argue that these reforms remain inadequate and that more comprehensive changes are needed. The creation of the National Practitioner Data Bank represented a major step forward in tracking healthcare providers across state lines and maintaining records of malpractice payments, licensing actions, and other relevant information. However, the database has limitations and does not capture all the information that might be relevant for identifying potential threats. International cooperation in tracking healthcare workers has also improved since the Swango case, with better communication between countries about practitioners who move across borders. However, significant gaps remain in the global monitoring of healthcare providers, particularly in developing countries with limited regulatory infrastructure. The case has become a standard reference point in medical ethics education, patient safety training, and healthcare administration programs. Students and professionals learn about the Swango case as an example of how individual pathology can exploit systemic weaknesses to cause massive harm. Patient advocacy groups have used the Swango case to push for stronger patient rights, better oversight of healthcare providers, and more transparency in hospital operations. These efforts have led to some improvements in patient safety measures and institutional accountability. The case has also influenced popular culture, inspiring books, documentaries, and fictional portrayals that have helped raise public awareness about the potential for medical serial killing. While some of these portrayals have been sensationalized, they have also served to educate the public about warning signs and the importance of patient advocacy. Research into medical serial killing has expanded significantly since the Swango case, with scholars and investigators working to better understand the phenomenon and develop more effective prevention strategies. This research has revealed that medical serial killers are more common than previously thought, and that many cases likely go undetected. The technological advances in medical monitoring and data analysis have created new opportunities for detecting patterns of suspicious deaths and identifying potentially dangerous healthcare workers. However, these tools are only effective if institutions are willing to use them and act on the information they provide. The Swango case continues to be studied by law enforcement agencies around the world as they develop specialized units and training programs for investigating healthcare-associated crimes. The complexity of these cases requires specialized knowledge and resources that many agencies are still developing. The families of Swango's victims continue to advocate for patient safety and healthcare reform, ensuring that their loved ones' deaths serve as a catalyst for positive change. Their efforts have helped maintain public attention on these issues and have contributed to ongoing reform efforts. The case serves as a reminder that the trust placed in healthcare providers carries with it enormous responsibility, and that society must maintain robust systems for ensuring that this trust is not betrayed. The price of inadequate oversight is measured not just in individual tragedies, but in the erosion of public confidence in the healthcare system itself. As healthcare systems continue to evolve and face new challenges, the lessons learned from the Michael Swango case remain relevant and important. The case demonstrates that protecting patients requires constant vigilance, systematic oversight, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about the potential for evil within institutions dedicated to healing. The ultimate legacy of the Harlotman case may be found not in the horror of his crimes, but in the reforms and awareness that his case has generated. If the deaths of his victims lead to better protection for future patients and the prevention of similar tragedies, then their sacrifice will not have been in vain. If this story intrigued you, subscribe to the channel to discover other real crimes that shocked the world and the minds behind them.